I learned something about power the night a man who owned half of Brooklyn tried to embarrass me over a glass of red wine. 3 hours earlier, the parking lot behind Romano's had smelled like rain and hot asphalt, and I just watched a man twice my size drop to his knees after one clean, controlled movement I didn't even think about. I didn't stay to explain, didn't wait for applause, I just clocked out, tied my apron tighter around my waist, and went back inside to finish my shift because tips pay rent and rent in Queens doesn't care about pride. My name is Evelyn Carter, 26 years old, 5'7", a waitress by uniform, a professional boxer by discipline, though most people don't see that part. They see the ponytail, the sensible black flats, the girl refilling water glasses under chandeliers that cost more than her car. Romano's isn't just a restaurant, it's a stage for men who measure worth in square footage and silence rooms without raising their voices, and that night Dominic Russo walked in like the lights had been waiting for him. 6'2", tailored charcoal suit, dark hair slicked back, the kind of calm that makes other men stand straighter without knowing why. I didn't know his name then, only that the hostess's smile tightened and two men in identical black jackets positioned themselves near the entrance as if the air had changed density. He took the corner table in the private section, the one with a clear view of every exit, and when I approached with a tray of San Pellegrino and house red, his eyes tracked me the way some men study a chessboard, not interested in the pieces, only in who controls them. I set the glasses down steady, years of training keeping my hands from trembling even when I felt that weight of attention, and for a moment everything was smooth, until one of his associates leaned back too far, clipped the edge of my tray, and the wine tipped, a thin line of red slipping across Dominic's cuff like an accusation. The room inhaled, I could feel it. I reached for a linen napkin immediately. "I'm sorry," I said, calm, professional, because accidents happen and dignity is a choice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Do you always move that carelessly?" he asked, almost conversational, eyes steady on mine. "Or just when someone important is watching?" The words weren't loud, but they were deliberate, meant to shrink me, to remind everyone within earshot where I stood in the hierarchy of the room. I felt the old instinct rise, the one that used to flare under stadium lights when an opponent tried to intimidate me before the bell. That quick spark behind the ribs that says hold your ground. "Respect doesn't cost extra," I replied, meeting his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, no more no less, because timing matters in and out of the ring. A faint shift crossed his expression, not anger, not yet, more like curiosity wrapped in pride. Around us, silverware clinked again, conversations resumed, but something had already changed. He had expected me to look down, to apologize twice, to fold, and I hadn't. He leaned back in his chair, assessing, and I realized this wasn't about wine anymore. It was about control, about who bends first under a spotlight neither of us asked for. What Dominic Russo didn't know, what no one in that dining room knew, was that I had spent years learning how to take a hit without flinching, how to breathe through pressure, how to wait for the exact second when arrogance overextends itself. And as I walked back toward the kitchen with my spine straight and my pulse steady, I had the quiet certainty that this night wasn't finished with either of us. I should have walked away after that, kept my head down, finished the shift, and let the night dissolve into tips and tired feet. But pride has a way of stretching time, and I could feel his attention like heat between my shoulder blades every time I crossed the dining room. Romano's glowed under crystal chandeliers, the hum of low conversations blending with the soft clink of silverware against porcelain. But at table 12 the air stayed different, charged, controlled, as if even the waitstaff adjusted their breathing around Dominic Russo. I refilled water glasses at the neighboring table and caught his reflection in the mirrored wall behind the bar. His gaze steady, unreadable, not angry, not amused, studying me the way a man studies risk. One of his associates, broad-shouldered and restless, leaned back in his chair again, and this time he did not clip my tray by accident. His hand brushed my wrist deliberately as I set down a plate, testing, measuring, expecting me to flinch. I did not. I rotated my arm slightly, subtle, controlled, shifting my weight the way I had practiced 1,000 times in a gym that smelled like chalk and leather, and his fingers slipped off balance, not hurt, just surprised. His chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor as he caught himself, drawing eyes from nearby tables. "Careful," I said evenly, the same tone I used with customers who forgot that service is not submission. He stood halfway, pride stung more than anything physical, and for a split second the room felt like it had narrowed to a 12-foot square, just enough space for ego to overextend. I did not raise my hands. I did not change my expression. I simply adjusted my stance, feet shoulder width apart, breath steady in through my nose, out through my mouth, because discipline is invisible until it is needed. Before he could say another word, Dominic lifted one hand slightly from his wine glass. That was all. The associate froze mid-sentence, jaw tightening, then slowly sat back down. The authority in that single gesture was louder than any shout. Dominic's eyes never left mine. "You seem very composed," he said, voice low, almost thoughtful. "Most people are not." I placed the check presenter on the edge of the table. "Most people do not train to be," I answered before I could stop myself. Silence again. Not hostile. Measuring. He tilted his head slightly, as if fitting a new piece into a puzzle he had not realized he was solving. "Train for what exactly?" he asked. I held his gaze for a heartbeat longer than polite. "For discipline," I said. I did not offer more. I did not owe him my resume. A faint smile touched one corner of his mouth, not warm, not cold, just intrigued. Around us, the restaurant resumed its rhythm, but something irreversible had shifted. He was no longer looking at me like background scenery in his evening. He was looking at me like an equation that refused to balance. When I turned to walk back toward the kitchen, I felt it again, that quiet certainty from earlier in the parking lot. The knowledge that control is not always about who speaks the loudest or who owns the building. Sometimes it is about who stands steady when tested. And as I pushed through the swinging door into the bright stainless steel glare of the kitchen, I understood that Dominic Russo had not just noticed me. He had begun to reconsider the rules he thought applied to everyone in his presence. The kitchen lights felt harsher after that exchange, stainless steel counters reflecting back a version of me that looked steady on the outside and razor alert underneath. Maria nudged my shoulder as she passed with a tray of tiramisu. "Table 12 is still watching you," she whispered, half teasing, half warning. I tied my apron tighter and reached for the espresso cups lining the warmer, the heat grounding me. I had finished 12 rounds under brighter lights than any chandelier in this building, with crowds louder than this dining room, and yet something about being measured in silence unsettled me more than any arena ever had. When I stepped back onto the floor, the energy had shifted again. Dominic Russo was standing now, jacket buttoned, speaking quietly into the ear of the floor manager. Marco nodded too quickly, eyes darting toward me before looking away. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, not fear, just awareness. Control moves in small conversations most people never notice. I delivered a cappuccino to a couple near the window, then felt a presence at my side. "Walk with me," Dominic said, not touching me, not blocking my path, simply stating it as if gravity would take care of the rest. I glanced toward Marco. He gave a tight smile that did not reach his eyes. I set my tray down behind the bar and followed Dominic toward the private hallway that led to the upstairs lounge. The carpet muted our steps. The noise of the dining room softened behind us. He stopped near a framed black and white photograph of the Brooklyn Bridge, hands loosely clasped in front of him. "You are not just a waitress," he said. It was not a question. I crossed my arms lightly, keeping my posture neutral. "You are not just a customer," I replied. A flicker of something almost like amusement touched his expression. "Fair." He studied me again, closer now, not invading, just observant. "My associate is not easily unsettled." "You unsettled him." I held his gaze. "He lost his balance. And you did not." The words lingered. Between us. He was not accusing. He was recalculating. I felt the old instinct rise again, the urge to protect what was mine, to reveal. "I train," I said simply. "In what?" His voice remained calm but sharper now. I let the silence stretch just enough to remind him that information is earned. "Boxing," I answered finally. "Professional level." There it was. "No fanfare. No apology." The hallway felt smaller for a second, like the air had condensed. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in recognition. "That explains the discipline," he murmured. "And the stance." I did not realize he had noticed that. "Most people who work here avoid confrontation," he continued. "You did not." I tilted my head. Avoiding and surrendering are not the same thing. For a long moment neither of us spoke. I could hear faint music drifting up from downstairs, the low hum of conversations continuing without us. Finally, he exhaled softly. I misjudged you. It was subtle, almost reluctant, but it was there. A man accustomed to commanding rooms acknowledging an error in calculation. I felt something shift again, not triumph, not validation, just balance restoring itself. That happens when you assume, I said. His gaze held mine, steady and searching, and for the first time that night I did not feel like a variable in his equation. I felt like an equal standing on the other side of it. Dominic did not step closer after that admission, but something in the space between us felt recalibrated, like a scale finally balanced after carrying too much weight on one side. The hallway remained quiet, insulated from the polished noise downstairs, and for a moment it was just the two of us standing beneath the soft glow of recessed lights. Professional level, he repeated thoughtfully, as if testing the truth of it against his own instincts. How long? Since I was 19, I answered. Golden gloves at 21. Regional circuit after that. I did not elaborate on the early mornings, the cracked knuckles, the way discipline becomes less about winning and more about surviving your own doubt. He studied my face carefully, not searching for weakness now but for consistency. And now you carry trays instead of titles, he said, not mocking, just observing. I shrugged slightly. Life shifts. Bills do not. A faint breath of something almost like respect crossed his expression. He nodded once, as if a private calculation had reached its conclusion. You protected yourself in the dining room without escalating, he said. That requires restraint. Control, I corrected gently. Anyone can react. Not everyone can choose not to. His gaze sharpened at that, and I realized the comment had landed deeper than I intended. He was a man accustomed to commanding outcomes, to pressing forward until the room adjusted to him. Control for him likely meant dominance. For me it meant knowing when to hold still. A phone vibrated softly in the inside pocket of his jacket. He glanced down, silenced it without looking at the screen, and returned his attention to me. That small gesture told me more than any words could. Whoever was calling did not outrank this conversation. You surprised me tonight, he said finally. Most people assume they know what they are walking into when they enter my space. I met his eyes evenly. And most people assume they know who I am when I refill their water. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly again. Not a smile exactly, but an acknowledgement. Footsteps echoed faintly from the stairwell behind us, and one of his associates paused at the end of the hallway, waiting for instruction without interrupting. Dominic did not turn around. I do not enjoy misjudging people, he said quietly. It creates inefficiency. I let out a slow breath through my nose. Then adjust your equation. He held my gaze for a long second, and I saw it clearly then, not arrogance, not hostility, but recalibration. A powerful man realizing that the framework he applies to the world does not fit every person he encounters. Walk me back downstairs, he said, softer now, less command, more request disguised as habit. We moved side by side toward the staircase, our steps measured, neither of us rushing. When we reached the dining room, conversations continued, glasses clinked. The city skyline shimmered beyond the tall windows, unaware of the quiet shift that had just taken place in a narrow hallway above polished hardwood floors. As he returned to his table, he did not look at me the way he had earlier in the night. There was no calculation of status, no casual dismissal. There was awareness. And as I picked up my tray again, I understood something just as clearly. Power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it stands still, refuses to bow, and waits for the room to catch up. The rest of the evening unfolded with a strange clarity, as if someone had adjusted the lighting not in the room but in my perception of it. Dominic remained at his table for another 40 minutes, finishing his wine slowly, speaking in low tones with his associates, yet the tension that had defined his arrival had softened into something quieter, more deliberate. I moved through my section with steady rhythm, balancing trays, memorizing orders, nodding at regular customers who had no idea that a subtle recalibration of power had just taken place 10 feet from their dessert plates. Every time I passed table 12 I felt his gaze, but it was no longer probing for weakness. It was observant, reflective. When he finally stood to leave, the restaurant shifted instinctively, chairs scraping lightly as people made space without being asked. I approached with the check presenter, placing it on the polished wood between us. His hand brushed the leather folder, then paused. "You fight this weekend?" he asked quietly, as if he had already confirmed the answer. I hesitated for half a breath. "Training only," I said. "No scheduled match." His eyes flicked to my hands, taking in the faint tape lines at my knuckles beneath the neutral polish I wore for work. He noticed everything. "You should not have to choose between discipline and survival," he said. The comment was measured, not patronizing, but it carried weight. "Everyone chooses," I replied. "Some of us just choose twice." A subtle nod acknowledged that. He signed the receipt with controlled precision and closed the folder. When I opened it moments later behind the bar, the tip was generous, more than the cost of the spilled wine, more than a statement. It was not charity. Felt like recognition. I looked up to find him watching me from across the room, coat draped over his arm, posture relaxed but alert. There was no smugness in his expression, no expectation. Just awareness. As he turned toward the exit, the glass doors reflecting the city lights beyond, one of his associates moved ahead to open them, but Dominic paused briefly, glancing back over his shoulder. Not a command. Not a warning. A look that acknowledged the hallway conversation, the recalculated equation. Then he stepped into the night air of Brooklyn, the door closing softly behind him. I exhaled without realizing I had been holding my breath. The restaurant noise returned to its usual texture. Forks against plates, low laughter, the hum of a Friday night winding down. Maria slid beside me, eyebrows raised. "Who are you exactly?" she asked under her breath. I gave a small smile and reached for the next stack of menus. "Just someone who stands," I said. But as I wiped down table 12 after they left, fingertips brushing the faint ring of condensation where his glass had rested, I understood something that lingered heavier than the scent of red wine. Dominic Russo did not walk away from unfinished equations. And whether I liked it or not, tonight I had become one. By the time my shift ended, Brooklyn felt colder than it had 3 hours earlier. The kind of sharp night air that clears your lungs and forces your thoughts into order. I changed out of my apron, pulled on my worn denim jacket, and stepped into the parking lot behind Romano's where the earlier humidity had given way to a thin layer of mist rising off the asphalt. My car sat beneath a flickering overhead light, paint chipped along the passenger side, reliable in the way that only old things can be. I unlocked the door but did not get in right away. The night was too still. Across the lot, a black sedan idled near the exit, headlights off, engine low and patient. It was not unusual for expensive cars to linger near this restaurant, but something about the timing felt deliberate. I told myself I was imagining patterns where none existed. Discipline does not just train the body, it trains the mind not to overreact. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, the dashboard clock glowing 11:48 p.m. As I eased toward the exit, the black sedan pulled forward slowly, not blocking, just aligning. The driver's window lowered smoothly, revealing a familiar silhouette in the dim light. Dominic's profile was unmistakable, sharp lines softened by shadow. He did not step out. He did not approach. He simply waited until I rolled my window halfway down. "You always take this long to leave?" he asked, voice calm, carrying easily across the narrow space between our cars. "I like to know who is still watching," I replied. His gaze held mine, not offended, not amused. "I do not follow people," he said. "I ensure clarity." The choice of words made me almost smile. "Clarity about what?" He paused for a fraction of a second, as if deciding how much to reveal. "About whether tonight was coincidence," he said, "or introduction." The air between us felt measured, neither tense nor relaxed, just aware. I rested my forearm lightly on the edge of the window frame. "Which do you prefer?" I asked. "Introduction," he answered without hesitation. No arrogance in it. No assumption. Just intention. I studied him carefully, the way I would study an opponent before a match, noting posture, breath, eye movement. There was no rush in him. No need to impress. That unsettled me more than confidence ever could. "I am not looking for sponsors," I said evenly. "Or managers." "I am not offering either," he replied. "You value discipline. So do I. That is rare." A car passed on the street beyond the lot, headlights sweeping briefly across both vehicles before disappearing. He glanced toward the sound, then back at me. "Train tomorrow?" he asked. "6 in the morning," I said before I could stop myself. His eyes flickered, filing the information away. "Good," he said quietly. "Consistency matters." There was a beat of silence, not awkward, not heavy, just unfinished. Finally, he inclined his head slightly, a gesture almost formal. "Drive safe, Evelyn." He used my name as if it had weight. Then he raised his window and the sedan eased forward, disappearing onto the street without urgency. I sat there for a moment longer, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the hum of my own engine. Introduction, he had said. Not coincidence. And as I pulled out onto the road, city lights blurring past my windshield, I understood that some encounters do not demand attention loudly. They position themselves quietly, then wait to see who has the patience to recognize them. At 5:45 the next morning, the gym smelled like rubber mats and stale ambition. The kind of place that does not care about last names or tailored suits, only about who shows up before the sun. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I wrapped my hands carefully, winding the white tape around each knuckle with practiced precision, feeling the quiet rhythm of repetition settle my thoughts. Outside, Brooklyn was still. Half asleep, storefront gates down, traffic light and distant. But inside the ring everything was honest. I stepped between the ropes just after 6, the canvas cool beneath my shoes, and began my warm-up, shadowboxing in slow, controlled combinations, focusing on breath, balance, restraint. Discipline first. Power second. I had just started working the heavy bag when I felt it. That subtle shift in the air that comes when someone enters a room without trying to announce it. The door at the far end of the gym closed with a muted click. I did not turn immediately. I let my jab land clean against the bag, felt the impact travel through my shoulder, heard the steady thud echo off concrete walls. Only then did I glance toward the entrance. Dominic stood near the reception desk, hands in the pockets of a simple dark coat. No entourage, no visible security, just one man observing. The gym owner, Frank, looked mildly confused but not alarmed, which meant Dominic had introduced himself calmly. I stepped back from the bag, letting it sway gently. He approached without rushing, eyes scanning the room with quiet awareness, not dominance. "You were not exaggerating," he said, voice low enough not to carry beyond us. "You trained seriously." I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist. "This is not a performance," I replied. "It is routine." He nodded once as if that confirmed something. Around us, 2 early morning regulars continued their drills, glancing over briefly before returning to their own focus. Dominic rested his forearms lightly against the edge of the ring, not crossing the boundary. "I wanted to see context," he said. "You operate differently here." I considered that. "Here there is no hierarchy," I answered. "Only preparation." His gaze followed the movement of the bag, then returned to me. "Preparation for what?" "For whatever stands in front of me," I said evenly. A faint breath left him, not quite a laugh. "You assume something will. It always does." Silence settled between us, but it was not uncomfortable. It felt observational. He watched as I resumed light footwork, testing angles, controlled pivots, nothing flashy, nothing aggressive. Just precision. "You are not fighting anyone today," he said quietly. "No," I answered, meeting his eyes. "But I am never unprepared." That seemed to resonate. He straightened slightly, hands still in his pockets. "There are people who mistake restraint for weakness," he said after a moment. "I have seen that," I replied. "And?" His eyes sharpened with interest. I stepped closer to the ropes, resting my forearms lightly across the top strand, mirroring his posture. "And they usually learn," I said calmly, not as a threat, just a fact. The gym lights flickered faintly overhead, and for the first time since he had walked into my world, I sensed something shift in him again. Not control, not calculation, but recognition. In this space I was not an equation to solve. I was a constant. And Dominic Russo, a man used to commanding rooms, was standing quietly on the outside of a ring. He could not enter unless invited. He did not leave immediately after that realization. Instead, Dominic remained at the edge of the ring as I moved through another round, the steady rhythm of leather against canvas filling the space between us. The gym had begun to wake up fully now, sunlight pushing through the high windows in thin gold lines, dust floating in the beams like suspended seconds. I focused on footwork, pivoting left, then right, breath-controlled, heart steady. Discipline first. Always. When the timer buzzed sharp and clean, I stepped back and rested my gloves on the top rope. Dominic had not checked his phone once. That detail did not escape me. "You treat this like ritual," he said quietly. "It is," I replied, peeling off my gloves and setting them down carefully. "Ritual creates stability." He considered that, gaze tracking the small routines I followed without thinking, folding my hand wraps neatly, wiping down the equipment, nodding to Frank at the front desk. "Most people chase control," he said after a moment. "You build it." I looked at him directly then. Control that depends on other people is fragile. The words settled heavier than I expected. His jaw tightened slightly, not defensive, just reflective. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, the sound vibrating faintly through the walls. "You think I depend on other people," he said. It was not accusation. It was inquiry. I picked up my water bottle and took a measured sip before answering. "I think you are used to people adjusting to you," I said calmly. "That is not the same as strength." For a split second the room felt smaller, like we were the only two people in it despite the quiet movement around us. He did not react with irritation. He did not withdraw. Instead, he stepped a fraction closer to the ropes, still respecting the boundary. "And what do you call strength?" he asked. I rested my forearms on the top strand again, mirroring him from the inside. "Consistency," I said. "Showing up at 6 in the morning when no one is watching. Holding your ground without raising your voice. Choosing restraint when it would be easier to prove something." His eyes held mine, steady, searching, and I saw it then, the subtle shift that had been building since the restaurant hallway. Not curiosity anymore. Recognition. "You did not try to impress me," he said quietly. "You did not need to," I answered. Silence stretched between us again, but this time it felt like agreement rather than assessment. He straightened slowly, adjusting the cuff of his coat with deliberate precision. "I do not enter rings I do not understand," he said. "That is wise," I replied. "But you came here anyway." A faint breath left him, almost a laugh. "Observation is not intrusion." "No," I said. "But intention matters." He paused at that, then inclined his head slightly, the same restrained gesture from the parking lot the night before. "Then let me be clear," he said. "I am not here to own your space." His voice did not waver. "I am here because I respect it." The words landed quietly, without spectacle, but they carried weight. Respect. Not possession. Not challenge. I stepped back from the ropes, feeling the early morning light warm against my shoulders, and understood that something had shifted permanently. He was not trying to control the equation anymore. He was learning it. And for the first time since he walked into my life, I realized that power can evolve when it is willing to stand outside the ring and listen.